Bob Burgess, we are in one of your beautiful buildings. You have the opportunity, responsibility at looking at a portfolio and footprint across many states and many cities. First, if you would give your and kind of you think Wells's perspective on Charlotte, how does it fit within the portfolio? Is it things going good? More people want to come here or not? What's going on from your perspective?
Well, first of all, you got to go back a little bit, right? I remember many years ago at First Union when the bank that you see down through the window there and us decided to bring capital markets into our worlds. And at the time, we thought, okay, how are we going to get these people who could live in New York, live in Chicago, live in London to come to Charlotte? So we thought we'd have to hire some really super duper recruiters. We thought we'd have to build palatial offices, and we thought we'd have to pay them a ton of money to get them to move here. And at first, that's exactly what we did. Mm-hmm. And then we found out the best recruiters we had were the people who moved here because they loved Charlotte, and for all the reasons that we're all talking about, right? Mm-hmm. So then, you go through time, and First Union became Wachovia, and then Wachovia became Wells Fargo, and probably many of you remember when that merger happened. We had about 18,000 people or so here in the city at that time, and I can remember one particular news article that said we could lose 5,000 jobs from Wachovia and Wells Fargo merger in Charlotte. Mm-hmm. So today, if you count the vendors and the contractors who work in our space every day, we're over 27,000 people in Charlotte. And
yeah.
And the short answer to your question is, when I look at that impressive list of all those jobs that have come to Charlotte over the last couple of years, I'm just telling you, 5 years from now, we'll have more people here than all that added up. And part of that is because of what you just talked about. Charlotte is a great place to live. Cost of a seat for us in Charlotte is a little bit around $5,000 a seat. That may sound like a lot, but we got a lot of space and we got a lot of technology. That's probably $1,500 to $2,000 less than our average cost around the country. And probably in some of our bigger cities like San Francisco, New York, places like that, it's over $20,000 a seat. So just from a real estate perspective, Charlotte's a great place to be. And then, for us, it's not about, real estate's not the driver, right? It's the people, it's the resources. That's what we have to have. And even though we have so many, that's the number one market of all of our markets. We have 650 buildings, major buildings in over 150 cities because, we got put together by all these mergers. And the most people we have, most team members are here in Charlotte. And where I think we're going in the future is really impacted by a couple things. One is, we're a bank, so we've historically been very hierarchical and some would say a little old-fashioned, and that's changing, I think, rapidly. But, the way it used to work was when you came to work, you got a job, you got a seat. Well, today people work so differently, right? And I think probably everybody is trying to figure out how to more effectively use their space. So for us, we have over 7 million square feet of space here in the city. We've got about 90 million square feet nationwide. 27,000 people here. We have about 285,000 around the country. When we look at where Charlotte can go and where we can go with Charlotte, the first thing we have to do is utilize the seats that we have better. It's sort of startling to think about this, but probably 40 to 50% of our seats every day aren't used. They're empty because people are out with their customers. People are out of training. They're out in another office. They're on vacation. So we have a lot of seats that we can use more effectively, and that's part one of our job. But in Charlotte, uptown, if we could free up the seats that we think we can free up, which is around 3,000 seats we already have 3,000 people who want seats, who who are coming here with new jobs over this next year. So we got to hustle on that. The second thing I'd tell you is because of those 650 buildings in 150 cities, it's a product of the mergers. And no new company would approach the world that way for their administrative staff, right? So over the next 3, 5, 7, 10 years, we're really going to try to consolidate folks and hire new people into our core markets. And our number one core market is Charlotte.
Awesome. Great. That's a headline right there. Yep. Thanks. So I like to go macro to micro a lot of times too. So Chris, can you give us a little state of the state? What's going on there from a economic development standpoint? I know you have to tread lightly in terms of politics, but we got the General Assembly getting together, and that always makes people in places like Charlotte nervous. What do you think are the kind of key initiatives for the state around economic development and economic growth? And then tell us how we, the real estate development community in Charlotte, can be as best of a partner as we can for you on inbounds, obviously working with the chamber, et cetera.
That's a lot to unpack. I'll try to address as much of that as I can and still keep plenty of time here. So first off, Bob, team, thank you very much for hosting this panel and inviting me part of it. Bob and his organization are a great partner of ours at the state level, so it's always good to spend some time down here as well in this kind of context. I'll say, unlike the other folks on this panel, I am not a real estate expert. Real estate comes into play in terms of what we do at a state level when it comes to economic development, but by no means am I any sort of an expert on real estate itself. After 21 years in economic development, I still struggle with telling you what exactly a cap rate is, whether a good cap rate's high, good, low, good, bad. So I'm not an expert, but we are more in the business, at least when it comes to what we do to try to recruit companies here. We're more trying to understand from a location aspect, what is it that companies are looking for when it comes to that combination of factors like talent, access to market, cost of doing business, taxes, incentives, regulatory regimes. All those things, of course, boil down to what kind of quality a location offers, and then from there, companies drill down into the actual real estate decision itself. At a state level, I think we came off of one of the best years in 2017 in terms of how we measure it, which is the number of wins we have, either recruitment of new companies or the successful expansion of companies that are already here. 150 wins at a state level, combining to an announced number of just shy of 20,000 new jobs with those 150 wins. That's all across the state. That's here in Mecklenburg as well as the other 99 counties. 19,999 jobs announced. So agonizingly short of 20,000, but we'll round up for all intents and purposes. $4.2 billion in capital investment. That's everything from a major new Chinese tire manufacturing facility in Rocky Mount down to very small expansions in some of our more rural areas. I think having, as an economic development professional working at a state level in a state like North Carolina, it has to be the envy of the profession nationally to have these two twin engines called Charlotte and the Research Triangle. To be able to lead with these two markets, which are two of the 10 fastest growing metros in the country population-wise, that ought to be an easy sell, right? I mean, when you can talk about your talent pool constantly refreshing with people moving in every day, 100 people a day in this region, 63 people a day in Wake County, that speaks to the talent issue that we all know is top of mind for the companies that we're talking to right now. The challenge is, as a state organization, as the governor reminds me, as Frank Emery, our board chair, reminds me, as the legislature reminds us, we are a statewide organization. So it's not just about Charlotte and Raleigh-Durham. We have to think about what other opportunities are we creating across the state in more rural areas. Even in markets like Greensboro and the Triad, which are growing but not having the same kind of growth as Charlotte and the Triangle, what sorts of opportunities are we trying to generate for those parts of the state to compete and attract new investment? I think from a legislative standpoint, we don't lobby. We don't get into that arena for obvious reasons, but we're certainly affected when legislation gets passed either at a state level or in certain localities. I would say the great product we have, the simplest thing is make sure that we don't somehow shoot ourselves in the foot.
Do no harm.
Yeah, exactly, right. I mean, local or state policies that send the wrong signal to businesses about where to invest or people and talent to move, if we can avoid doing that, we've got such formidable momentum through these two twin engines of the Triangle and Charlotte region. The biggest challenge for us now is figuring out how do we spread some of that prosperity around other parts of the state that are not seeing that same degree of success. So I'll kind of leave it there
Yeah, sure.
as a setup for the rest of the panel.
So good segue if you kind of go macro, micro to your neighbor there at the table. Tracy, you're still in the honeymoon phase, right? I'm sure from some perspective, I know you're like waiting to actually get to the honeymoon. You jumped right in. Again, thank you for that. What are the city's priorities, in your opinion, kind of on economic development? We obviously know the Opportunity Task Force was formed to make sure that we can move from 50 out of 50 in terms of major metropolitan cities for upward economic mobility. What that means is that if you're born into poverty here in Charlotte, out of 50 of the major cities, you have the least chance of moving out of poverty in Charlotte. 49th is Atlanta, so they're not much better. So we hear a lot about that. I don't think you have to get into that too much because there's plenty of other panels on that, even though it's extremely important. Talk about what you're working on, tools that you have for economic development, and with your other perspective of being a real estate developer, how can we help you more?
So let me start with, I don't think there ever was a honeymoon
No, I don't think
phase
so.
because I've
Yeah.
spent so much of my career inside the government center that I've wandered the halls. It wasn't new to anybody. But I have come in very strong of coming from the private sector, and I will use that as possibly long as they will let me. You guys on the outside are probably more happy to see me than city staff right now. They definitely don't like to see me coming. But there's a couple of things. I'm going to jump around a little bit. The first thing is around real estate. I came in with the perspective of it's really hard to get deals done in this city, and it's hard to get things through the city. My goal when I was at Lincoln Harris was to keep Jono out of the government center because it was difficult, and we needed to find a way, and part of the conversation with Marcus even attempting to bring me on was I was going to him saying, it doesn't matter if it's a river district or a smaller project, there's so many things along the way that we're hitting that are hiccups that cost time and cost money. And in the case of, I'll use Camp North End as an example, there's no way a New York developer should think it's hard to do business in Charlotte. We got to change that. So there's some things that came forward in this year's budget to try to alleviate that. There's things that I'm implementing with my department to kind of have a concierge work through issues, think proactively, especially on big projects. So whether it's a city big project like in Eastland, or it's an outside big project like a river district or Camp North End, that we, the city, are as much invested as the developers on making sure these are successes and making sure that they create the job opportunities that we're all in the vision for. So that's one of the things that you'll see. Again, there's things in the budget that Marcus and council have already put in place around the real estate. The other thing is that our department specifically is going to pivot from being what I call very reactive to being very proactive. I feel like a lot of times we've sat back, we've waited for business recruitment opportunities to come to us, and we work through an announcement, and that's it. I'm taking the approach that we don't stop until butts are in seats. Just to put it bluntly, that it's about getting people in place and the jobs in place. And so we need to be partners all the way through, not just on a business investment grant, but again, working all the way through. And my strategy in this is to pull the county along with that same philosophy too. I had a lot of conversations with the county manager before coming on to make sure that those partnerships, we were going to be lockstep on that. The other piece on the business recruitment side that I just want to hit on is getting the city and the county also to think regionally. We don't have to fight for just Charlotte. We should be fighting for Cabarrus, and we should be fighting for, because again, all rising tides, or rising tide lifts all ships, is we need to take that approach, and we need to be thinking that way and working that way. And the hope then is that resonates in Raleigh, that we're acting and working more as a region. So those are the big ones.
Well, hey, let's just stay on that regional point, and I want to tee up John in a second, but Chris, how do you like your chances competing globally if you have an Asheville, Charlotte, Triad, Triangle region?
I mean, those are all great markets. I mean, it really depends on the situation, right? I think for the kinds of companies we're talking to, it all boils down to the talent piece, especially in this very strong economy we're in right now. So the better we can articulate how we satisfy a company's talent demands, wherever we're talking about in North Carolina, the better of a chance we have to beat the competition. And we do three things really well in North Carolina around talent. One, we grow it well, which means our universities, our institutions are producing talent organically. That's great. Two is we're grooming talent well through things like our community colleges, which provide a lot of training for industry. We've got the military putting tens of thousands of people out into civilian life over the next several years. That's an enormous talent pool that a lot of companies sometimes overlook as a great source of disciplined people who have all those soft skills that you want as an employer. You just got to train them up on the hard skills. And then we get talent, meaning that we recruit people from outside who will either move here sight unseen, or they'll move here after finishing college, or they'll move here mid-career. We're just replenishing our talent pool by people moving to North Carolina from the outside. In fact, I bet Charlie before the panel started, I'm just curious, quick show of hands, who is native to North Carolina in this room? Okay, who is not native to North Carolina in this room? See, I told you about 50%. It's probably more than 50%. We do a great job in North Carolina attracting people from the Northeast, the Midwest. All of that, again, fulfills that third leg of the talent stool, and that makes us really competitive no matter where you are in North Carolina.
Awesome. Well, someone who raised their hand is a native, Jono. You heard Tracy talk about this shift from being kind of reactive to proactive. As someone who started his career 25 years ago in Atlanta, looking up at 85, I saw Charlotte being very proactive for years, and it feels like it's gotten a little more reactive in more recently. And that's part of, I think, maybe this crossroads of moving from adolescence maybe into early adulthood. You grew up here. You've seen your hometown kind of change. You're now developing in the city, soon to be kind of out of the city, unincorporated, but to be annexed in with the River District, and right across the line in the upstate there, South Carolina at the Cato site. Talk to me about what the biggest change you've seen. I don't think you talk about a history lesson about Charlotte, but in terms of developing in both places in this region, where are you seeing as assets, some challenges? If you could wave your magic wand and give it to Tracy and she can make things happen, what would you say needs to be done?
Yeah, that is absolutely a loaded question. I think from our perspective, Charlotte has seen a lot of growth. Unquestionably, we've all heard that, and it's driven by talent, but it's also driven by infrastructure. And when I say it's also driven by infrastructure, it's driven by the airport, and the ability and the mobility of people as they move through this city and this region. And when I say this region, I'm counting South Carolina. When you think about what we're doing, south of town, it comes down, right or wrong, it comes down to money. I mean, it comes down to the fact that, a company can move to the state of South Carolina, and there may be a little bit more benefit than staying in the state of North Carolina, but they still get the ability to pull their employees from Charlotte and from this region. They still get the ability. You're 20 minutes away from the airport, and you still have that infrastructure. So I think that from our standpoint, we were strategic about what we tried to do and what we're trying to do down there. That it's not just you're in South Carolina, you're in the Charlotte region. I mean, we're basically one exit away from North Carolina. So I think that was the strategic side of it. I think if I could hand Tracy and really talk to her about what I would hope, having grown up here, and hope where we will go in the future, is that the investment in people is very important, but the investment in infrastructure is just as important. And how we move people, and whether that is light rail, whether that is high-speed rail, whether that is roads, whether that is whatever it may be, is how we're going to connect people. Because if you just look at the office space that we build today, it's about connecting people. Bob talks about 3,000 seats that he wants to bring here and bring in Uptown, but that's also the ability for them to cross-sell their products and to be together and to have that community. Well, that's what we're talking about here as it results to infrastructure, and it's about connectivity. And so if I could hand Tracy my dream of where we are, it has to do with the infrastructure, whether it's, the light rail, the high-speed rail to Atlanta, to Raleigh, to on up to DC, because that is going to be the demand in order to bring those people here.
Well, to your point, and using that kind of metaphor of adolescence to adulthood and growing up, you get older, toys are more expensive, or things are more expensive. Think about it, like your clothes, your car.
Yep.
So we're getting to be a bigger city. This stuff's expensive, but we need to invest, right? Show me a city that's investing in itself. So Bob, one thing Chris mentioned, talent, the 5,000 versus 20,000 a seat. That's going to probably, that delta will be here probably for a while. As that gets more expensive, that's always going to be there. But what are the things you're most concerned about for your talent that you're bringing here within this region, within this city, that you can't necessarily control, that maybe, as a leadership, as a team, the chamber, we can help on?
John, I just hit it. It's transportation. It's the key. In every other city, every other major market that we're developing buildings, and we're building a ton of buildings all over the place, we wouldn't think of putting a building anywhere away from a mass transit route. We just wouldn't. In Charlotte, I had a really unique thing. We just did this expansion down to Ballantyne. And when we were doing that, we were moving basically a lot of finance folks from the inner city down to Ballantyne. And so, of course, whenever we're going to undertake something like that, we do a ton of surveys. And I kept getting these responses, and I was like, this is bull. People just don't want to move to Ballantyne. Because the response was, I don't have a car. How am I going to get there? And I thought, I moved here in 1974. You can't live in Charlotte without a car. Well, guess what? People do. And, all you got to do is take a little drive down South End, right, and see the incredible growth that's been there. And, that really made an impact on me, because there's not an easy way for anybody from South End to get to Ballantyne. There are ways publicly, but it's really difficult. So to me, it's transportation. That's the huge key.
You mentioned transportation and owning a car.
Wait, she's dying to say.
I wanna say
hold on.
something.
Go ahead, go.
Go ahead, Trace.
Well, no, I think you guys are absolutely hitting it. And one of the things where I'm trying to get our team to think creatively already is around infrastructure. We had a conversation, a couple of people in the room yesterday about South Park, and it's how do you keep that a strong and solid commercial area, and it's not, doesn't fall on the backs of the developers or landowners, and it doesn't fall solely on the back of the city. It's a partnership. And as we look at Ballantyne and how it evolves, I want Cats, and I've already told Cats, you got to be in the room when we start these conversations, whether it's rezonings or different things out there. We got to all be in the room talking about this, and it's not siloed. We're going to look at it, and it's not wait for Northwood or anybody to come ask for a public-private. It's let's get creative about it on the front end so we can start to strategize. And it's all around infrastructure.
It's funny, Bob. Go ahead, Chris.
I'd say, that's a really smart strategy, because what we see at the state level when companies approach us, especially those that are in the knowledge-based professions, the kinds of deals that I think Charlotte is competing for and wants to get more of, there's that bias towards density, dense or more urban areas where their employees, and let's not kid ourselves, they all want millennials, right? Everybody wants to hire millennials. And what do they think millennials want? They want to be able to walk to work, walk to where they go after work for the bars, the restaurants, all of that. And if you're able to tie in something like mass transit, it just makes it that much more appealing. You've all seen what Amazon is looking for in their HQ2. There's very much a bias towards transit-related development. And you all have a great one here. The other day I had some meetings here in downtown Charlotte, and rather than mess around with parking and all over, I got off at UNCC and rode the Blue Line down for the first time on the new extension. That's a fantastic asset to have. It was super easy, super cheap. I think $2.50 one way. I think to be able to have that's a really smart idea to incorporate that sort of conversation early on with your clients.
So Bob mentioned that he wouldn't consider building a building, occupying a building, buying a building if it wasn't on mass transit in most of their markets. So think about the way that so many cities have fallen all over themselves regarding Amazon. That's the promise of potentially 50,000 jobs. Wells Fargo has 27,000 right now in Charlotte. If Wells Fargo was coming and said we have 27,000 jobs, we would fall all over ourselves to build a mass transit line wherever they wanted. I mean, it would probably happen that way. So I would argue the blue line's a nice start. We better figure out how we're going to do 5 more of those, because if you look at a place like Denver, which is basically the exact same size as Charlotte, they did exactly that and have even a lower unemployment rate than we do. Talk about millennials. We're all chasing millennials. If you've actually looked, I mean, some of you probably have millennials living at home with you or in the basement, or right? They have the lowest driver's license percentage of any demographic and cohort in the history of the United States. 16-year-olds are not showing up at the DMV when they turn 1601 like a lot of us did to get their driver's license. They just don't care. They get around differently, Lyft, Uber, mass transit. And so it's a very different dynamic. And so we were in Atlanta last week for the intercity visit, and they are getting rental premiums of 20% on office rents if they're at mass transit. State Farm, 2 million square feet, had to be on mass transit. I mean, so this is not a liberal thing, right? Moving people on trains, it's an economic development thing. And we do not have the money in the state or the city to pave enough roads to move people around. So with that, John will come back, if you would. As you're growing your company, right, you have to recruit talent, right? So we said infrastructure, that's important. What else? If you could have something from the city as a partner that Tracy's working on, and you got a good audience with her right next to you, right? What else? Permitting? Is it partnerships?
Are you setting me up for this?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I wrote some down.
I mean, come on,
Yeah.
just throw that softball out there and let me go hit it. Is
Yeah,
that what you're
exactly.
asking me to?
Yeah.
Look, I mean, I think we, as developers, and people in the real estate industry, it's very well known. It is, I mean, Tracy said it, it is hard to get through the permitting process. It is hard to get through the development process, even as you're going vertical. And I've said it to Marcus, I've said it to Dina, I've said it to anybody that will listen. If you're transparent and you just tell us what we're going to pay up front, we'll price it in the model. But if we, I mean, I was telling somebody, earlier tonight, we literally, in our tower going up, uptown right now, we have a line item in our budget that says permitting. And it is nothing more than a thumb in the air trying to guess what it's going to cost us to get through the permitting process and to get through the process of developing based on inspectors and other things. And so, and it's a pure guess. And I know that I probably shouldn't be saying that because I'm going to get, an inspector coming back at me. But the fact of the matter is that is the case.
Right.
I mean, we go through it. I mean, I guarantee, I look at Peter in the back of the room and he's shaking his head. I mean, he goes through the exact same thing.
Right.
So,
It shouldn't be this difficult,
no,
right?
and I
mean,
think it's
yeah.
just transparency, and it's understanding the fact that at the end of the day, we as developers are trying to create a place where people can, as Tracy says, butts in the seat, and for them to do their job.
Tracy, flip the script. What, from a development perspective, like a development community, construction community, design community, what can we be doing to help you and help Marcus and council too, right? That's which is crazy, right? We every 2 years we got a new council and folks coming in. So thoughts there?
So I'll go back to an effort that I was involved with through NAOP and a couple other different groups. It goes back about a year and a half ago, where we said, we're all having issues. How do we kind of align them to take them to the city? Because there's definitely people at the city that feel like, the real estate industry is constantly complaining. We got an issue here, we've got an issue there. And so there's a group of us that spent a lot of time aligning 4 or 5, we call it the list of 8 different things, and that we took to Marcus. And we said, here are things that just are easy. They don't require opening up ordinances. They don't require city council actions. They're just simple things that you can do. And that's where some of the start of what has started to happen. I mentioned some of the things in the budget to alleviate some of these conflict points. That's the first step in that. But I think what we need from the industry is, again, a collective voice that continues to come back. Some of the individuals that have helped put some of these things into action so far, I'm not letting them off the hook. I'm like, hey, wait, you don't get to move on to something else in a different department. We've all got to continue to stay focused on this. I know that there's been a lot of discussion about UDO versus comprehensive plan. The one thing that we've continued to keep in the
Just give everyone a little heads up, what does that mean? The city's thinking about rewriting, or it's in the process of rewriting its entire zoning code.
Yes, so for a couple of years now, the conversation has been coming up with this unified development ordinance, which is really the end game. It's rewriting the zoning ordinance, aligning a lot of our other ordinances. But what we've realized is we don't have a plan and a vision to start with. So we were really trying to get to the end without the vision. So there's an effort now to kind of go back to the vision piece. That'll take about 24 months, I think. That's a hard pill to swallow when the UDO conversations have been going on for 2 or so years, 3 years.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I went in with, and I have stayed on several of the departments, is that that's great. Taiwo, planning director, you do comprehensive plan, start working on that. But there's some other of us that need to stay focused on this ordinance alignment, because that's where the conflicts come up a lot of times in the early stuff. You still have your permitting issues and things like that on the county side, but that's the early piece, and we can't take our eye off the ball on that. We can't wait for the comprehensive plan before we get to that.
I'm going to open it up to you guys in a second. Chris, you talked about job growth in the state from existing companies and inbounds. What's the breakdown in percentage? The majority of growth is always going to be folks who are already here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think any economic development group that's not trying to do what they can to support the growth needs of existing employers is really shooting themselves in the foot. I mean, it's great to recruit new companies in from the outside, but just like every private business wants to make sure they keep their existing customers, I mean, economic developers have to do the same thing. You have to tend to the needs of the companies in your backyard. They don't need to be wooed, right? You don't have to make the pitch to them about why it's a great state or a great community. They're already there. They know that. You just have to maybe remove some roadblocks that may be in their way of future growth. So I think if you look at our numbers last year, of those 20,000 announced jobs, it probably split out 60% of that job creation was coming from existing employer expansions. The other 40% would have been attraction of a new employer to the state and their jobs as well.
That's actually more new than I would have even thought.
Yeah, it was a very good year in terms of recruitment, but I'd say generally speaking, it's probably closer to 30-70, 20-80, depending on where you are. Yeah.
Got it. Questions in the audience? Yes, sir.
John, being a native of Charlotte myself, kind of understand. What programs, as Brian alluded to, as far as building your business and finding talent within the local community, what programs or ideas might your company have in place to kind of close that gap, or might be an advantageous way to close that 50 out of 50 socioeconomic gap, which Brian alluded to a little earlier?
Yeah, so I think one of the and I'm going to get around to it. So I think it's important for our business right now, and I'm going to use the construction side too, is that there is a shortage of construction workers, and we all know that, and it's specialists in that business. And that, while that's not directly, Lincoln Harris, so to speak, but it does affect what we're able to do day in and day out. And so I think if there are programs that, I think I've talked to several people about it, programs at the community college, at CPCC, and other groups that can really help build, these specialized, on the construction side, I think that's beneficial. As it results to Lincoln Harris, I think, within our company, we continue to look at talent. We continue to try to grow that talent. I think we're probably a little bit different, where we're a much more flat organization. So I'm not necessarily saying that we have a program that does that, but we're always willing to look at different programs.
Well, your neighbor Charlie I mean, you're an economist, these are rankings and numbers. Have you looked into kind of the economic mobility disparity that Charlotte has, and do you have any insight? I know there's a lot of smart people working on it. We have task force and reports and ongoing meetings, but where do you see, what levers or knobs do you think, as an economy grows or matures like Charlotte, that could have the biggest impact on upward mobility?
Sure, and I mean, a lot of that sort of lays outside of my expertise, but I will say, because of the high concentration of high-paying banking jobs in this city, that is increasingly becoming sort of an issue of, a lot of high-paying jobs versus jobs that, pay average or, something below average. So that's definitely something to think about as the city grows. I did want to comment about the labor shortages in construction. And one of the things we see is that young people just don't want to have anything to do with construction. So one of the things I think you can do beyond actual training and for the job is just educating younger folks on, what type of job construction can be or manufacturing can be. I'm one of those people that's a big believer in having a very strong manufacturing base, and I know Charlotte has a very long history of manufacturing. But I think just developing the manufacturing industry in Charlotte could be just another feather in the cap for the city. To give you a number, as an economist, we sort of think about things in terms of economic multiplying effects. So of every industry, manufacturing has the highest multiplier effect. So for every dollar in manufacturing sales, you get an extra $1.50 in economic output. So that's just one of the things that kind of goes back to the labor shortage issue. We're in a very tight labor market at the national level. We're tight labor markets in Charlotte and in North Carolina. There's been a shortage in construction workers basically since the recession. So I think the more programs that are in place and that exist to sort of persuade the younger people to even consider construction jobs, because I'm technically a millennial, but people of my age cohort, they don't want to lift a brick, they don't want to do anything, they want the office job. So just people don't know how much money you can make in construction or manufacturing or anything like that, and a lot of these higher skilled jobs actually pay a higher than average salary. So just besides training them for the actual job, just educating them about these types of jobs and that they exist and that they're good opportunities.
As a mixed-use developer, I love the boom in Charlotte's one certain area of manufacturing, breweries. Right? I mean, think about it. Like, that's actually an industrial use that actually has some really good legs. Who else has a question? Brian, and then next. Go ahead.
Mine is more of a comment, a collaboration type thing, coming off of the intercity trip to Atlanta. One of the most important notes that I took, and it's sort of not directed at you directly, Tracy, is we had this equivalent of the city manager of Atlanta who is from Charlotte, and the head of MARTA, and someone else from economic development, and they said that the government center needed to be more, you understand development, what it takes to get a project off the ground, what it takes to run it. They can learn from us, and that they need to collaborate both in the government center and with developers. And it's a hard thing to implement, but I think Tracy's a good person to bridge that together. And I think there's a room full of people who will come and sit down in a collaborative effort to try to help. And how do we get there?
So one of the things, I don't know if it was the worst mistake for my first day to be on the day that we rolled out the city budget for FY19. It got me some cover for a couple of weeks. But one of the things I'm already starting to tell council members is this budget year was about public safety and affordable housing. And going back to the economic mobility discussion, if we don't make the 2020 budget about economic development, we're missing in weaving all of that together. And a part of that is I got to have more people in in the city that understand development. We have a couple of good people, but we have a lot of people who are working in these real estate deals, and that's part of the issue, who don't understand it, don't have the first. I've had a couple of eye-opening moments since I've been there. We've got to get more. So my goal is really to beef up my staff and get some people who really understand development. So we can, one, make doing business easier, but then two, look at other public-private opportunities in a way that makes sense. So you will see me out talking to you all and asking everybody to come in and talk to us, because I have a perspective of these projects that I lived with for the past 4 years. And they were all a blast. No easy one. But, so I have one perspective, and I have some other perspectives from some other developments around town, but I want everybody's perspective on it. So we welcome that collaboration, and again, want to make it not a you all versus us, but we are partners in growing Charlotte.
It's easy in a room like this to think, hey, the private sector should just, if everyone in City Hall or whatever was private sector, it would work great. And I think we are getting a better mix of that. Tracy's an example. Taiwo, the planning commissioner, came from HNTB, has a background in the private sector. One of Tracy's top lieutenants is a gentleman by the name of Todd DeLong. Todd DeLong moved here from Florida, had done consulting and private sector work across the country, where other cities and counties use economic development tools that Charlotte may or may not have access to, that Charlotte may or may not have ever used. So hopefully getting that better. Next question. Sir.
How did we lose Alliance Bernstein to Nashville? It made no sense to me.
Well, that's a great question. I'm so glad you asked that one and not me. So Bob, why don't we go down the line? And I know you had no stake in that, right? What's your opinion? What do you think? But by the record, before we heard from Alliance Bernstein that they wanted to be a differentiated kind of anchor or financial services firm in Nashville. That's what we've kind of heard, that if they were here, they'd just be part of everyone else. That's kind of what we've heard. Go ahead, Bob.
Well, I'm not an authority on this answer.
Right.
But I would tell you that Charlotte has evolved. Back in the day, it was all about what the guys down the street and what the people here used to think. And they could control so much. And I think we are so far removed from that today. But I'm not sure that as a community, we are cohesive yet. We still have the opportunity to really be cohesive. And you think of some of the giant organizations, Lowe's, others that are around here, that if we all could get together, I think we could make a difference. So maybe some of the past was viewed by them as something that they couldn't overcome, and maybe we just need to demonstrate better about where we are today and where we can be in the future.
Well, from a group that was in Atlanta, which is close to 6 million people now, it's a lot harder to be cohesive there. And it hurt them for about 15 years when they couldn't, so they're kind of paying for that. Charlie, your thoughts, your opinion, because you're a new, how long have you been in Charlotte now?
Since December.
Oh, not even a year yet, so you're definitely fresh meat. So talk about your opinion as an economist and as clearly someone drinking the Charlotte Kool-Aid.
Well, I'm not sure I have any comments on that specific case, but it is something we are seeing. Generally, companies are seeking out more affordable, better places to live, especially when they're considering their employees more. So this is part of an overall trend, I think, and I suspect Charlotte's going to benefit a lot from it, where it's not just, you have to be centered in your, industry cluster. You have a lot more freedom, and I think Bob made a few of these great points too. You're not tied to a desk anywhere. People work remotely. People are traveling a lot. So it's really a part, and we see this all over the place, and it's especially acute in places like California right now, where people are leaving Los Angeles, leaving San Francisco, and they're moving to Texas, or they're moving to some other more affordable place with better natural amenities, but better restaurants and entertainment and things like that. So I suspect that probably had something to do with it, and I'm not sure exactly why, you know, Nashville or Charlotte in that specific instance.
Answered like a
but-
politician, Charlie. Good job.
Thank you.
Jono, I told you I was going to tease you. I was going to ask this question. Thankfully, someone else did. Lean in on this one. What do you think? Come on.
Why do I think? I mean, I think there was probably having a little bit more knowledge than others. I'll be very blunt. We were engaged with them and had gone through the process with them, and so I know probably more than I should. But I think at the end of the day, you know, I think it was a toss-up between us and Nashville. I think, you know, Nashville was a new, bright, shiny object, I think, at the end of the day. We had a lot of things going our way, including people here that were already here as part of Alliance Bernstein, including our partner who does a lot with Alliance Bernstein. And, you know, it's unfortunate that they decided to do what they did. But I think some of it had to do with connectivity, and a little bit of what we talked about. And, you know, how do you really connect, you know, Uptown to South Park to Ballantyne in your sort of your major markets? And what does that do for your employee base, and where does that employee base live? And but I think there was I don't know that, and Bob and others can speak to this, but I don't know that there was one sort of direct, this is why you didn't get it. I think it was more of a laundry list.
Tracy?
It's easy to play Monday quarterback on this, but I want to echo a little bit about what Bob said. Is I think it's a cohesive effort on how we're showing our community as a whole and our community coming together. And then I also think it's having that deep bench of opportunities. So, you know, not just Uptown and Ballantyne, but really having your river districts and your Camp North Ends and a lot of diversity in where the opportunities are and that they're connected.
Yeah. Chris, your thoughts? I mean, because it's a loss for North Carolina,
Sure,
too.
absolutely. No, that was a very disappointing loss. I mean, again, in 2 decades of doing this, when you hear why you don't win, if you're lucky enough to get that feedback, and a lot of times you just don't, companies won't bother explaining it to you. When you do hear it, it's never just one thing. It's usually some mix of factors. Some are strategic, some are tactical. I mean, strategically, I would say that what we heard was consistent with the idea they wanted to be a big fish in a small pond versus a small fish in a big pond. And I would never discount that some companies just think that way. I think that factored in a lot. You know, there's no personal income tax in Tennessee. These are all 6-figure paying jobs on average. You never know how much that might be a tactical reason why they feel like Nashville might have been a better choice in that instance. The reality is that that's just getting it from one perspective. Who knows who else within the C-suite had different ideas about where that ought to go. It's an intensely personal decision at the end of the day when you relocate a company.
You know, we do a lot of business and development in Nashville, and talk about connectivity. They got no transit, and traffic's a nightmare. So it'll be interesting to see how they adjust to that. But I think the CBJ or the Nashville Business Journal, they did a pretty in-depth story of how that was won. It's a great read. Talk about in concert between city and state. The state of Tennessee changed the state law to provide a more favorable tax treatment at the state level, specifically for Alliance Bernstein. Now, it'll help other firms as well, but like, I just wonder if we could have done that. If something wanted to come to Charlotte, would we have had the ability a year ago? Maybe not. Now, I think when I heard the city was doing this, I thought they were crazy. The city, Vi Lyles deserves credit for this. She raised her hand and said, let's host the Republican National Convention. And that, raising her hand, is creating a wonderful dialogue that's going on in Raleigh between the city of Charlotte and Raleigh that has not existed for quite some time. And so who knows, maybe the next time we can do that. But great question. Who else got one right here?
I wanted to say something what Charlie said about construction and the lack of workers. You know, if we're going to build the infrastructure for Charlotte and build these buildings, we need construction.
Yeah.
And I think one thing it would help the city is to re-establish the trades in the high schools and the community colleges
That's great.
construction.
Totally agree.
Because not everybody wants to go to college, and you can go through a 4-year program, it's paid for you.
Yeah.
You get paid while you're going, and at the end of those 4 years, you have a certificate, you're an electrician, for an example, and you get paid $30 an hour, and you have no student loan.
So on that, and this is something I would challenge Tracy, one thing I've noticed is that if it's parks, the county, they're in charge of that. If it's transportation, the city's in charge of that. So God forbid there's a trail and a greenway, I don't know who does that. And then if, we got a housing issue here, and so that's just the city, but I talked to folks on the commission and the county, the issues with housing affect education. It affect other things. So education, right, CMS is not a city purview, but your job is economic development, which is jobs and prosperity. They are absolutely connected. And so hopefully you'll get some public-public partnerships going. And I know you're the one to do that, but don't answer. There's another question over here. Last one.
Yeah, Chris Turner, and it's about that public-private partnership. We talk about people are moving here every day because of the low cost of living, but we're also talking about needing to make a multi-billion-dollar investment in transportation. What's the gap in capacity of this being an affordable city to live in versus how much we need to bring in more money to do the investment in infrastructure? Do you see that being on the backs of the taxpayer, and does that make this city no longer an affordable city? Or are we looking for some partnerships that help ease that load on the individual that's moving here?
Yeah, I think, because Tracy needs to answer this too, but the realm of putting everything on the public dollar isn't there. So there's got to be a partnership between the public and the private. Now, having said that, the private's ready to go, and I think there are organizations that are ready to invest in infrastructure, whether it's high-speed rail or any other type of transportation. But the public sector has to come in and play ball and understand that, it's business. It's not the way that it's been done in the past as a public side. And so I think there's a combination that needs to occur, but it's definitely a private-public partnership that needs to happen.
Tracy, last word?
I would echo that. I mean, I think we're going to have to ask some really tough questions from a public financing model in years to come of what do we want to do, what kind of appetite do we have. But I do think it's a public-private. For me, coming off of the NCDOT board, forget what you might think about 77 and the managed lanes, that was a public-private partnership. So forget about whether it was done right or wrong. For me, it was so incredibly important because it was setting the tone with the state to do more public-private opportunities and opening up the door for that type of infrastructure. And so I totally agree. I think we have to continue to look for opportunities on at the minor level all the way up to the major stuff.
Let's not kid ourselves. Like, we will pay for it. I mean, we can either pay for it through taxes, or you're going to pay for it because a private company will finance it, and you will pay that private company. So it just doesn't fall from heaven. We got to pay for it. So Kendall, come on up. I know you got a little chart for us.
What a great panel, guys. Thank you for your time and effort.